All right, so I want to talk about our different types of ribs now. So when we talk about our ribs, we have 12 pairs. So we have 12 on the left side and 12 on the right side. And before we get into the ribs themselves, we have to talk a little bit about the bones that help us with our thoracic cavity. So to create our thoracic cavity or our rib cage, we're going to include the sternum, which is our breastbone. We're going to include the ribs, and we're going to include the thoracic vertebrae, which have the ribs attached to them. So those are all the parts that are going to make up that thoracic cavity. So when we talk about the ribs, we use the term costal. Costal refers to the ribs. So you'll notice that the ribs have an attachment, most of them have an attachment to the sternum here. And they're going to attach to the sternum via the costal cartilage. Remember, another term for rib is costal. So the costal cartilage is connecting to the ribs. So when we look at our different ribs 1 through 7, so you'll notice rib 1 over here is underneath the clavicle. So rib 1 through rib 7, all of these here are known as true ribs. And the reason that they're known as true ribs is because they have a direct attachment to the sternum. So we have the rib attaching to the costal cartilage, which is going directly to the sternum. And that's really noticeable in ribs 1 through 5. They basically have one rib goes to costal cartilage, goes directly to the sternum. In rib 7 here, you notice it's got its own costal cartilage and then it goes up. But if you notice ribs 8, 9, and 10, they have to use somebody above them. So they have to come together, which we see here, and then they move up to rib 7's costal cartilage and then get to the sternum. That's what we call an indirect attachment. And that indirect attachment, again, is because they're having to use the costal cartilage from rib 7 to get to the sternum. So those are known as false ribs. And the last two are also false ribs because they have no attachment to the sternum at all. So if we look at this one over here, notice my fingers touching the very tip of it. It's not attaching to the front at all, and neither is this little one over here. So if there is an indirect attachment, meaning they have to use someone else's costal cartilage to get to the sternum, or no attachment, they are known as false ribs, and those are pairs 8 through 12. So 8, 9, and 10 have that indirect attachment, and ribs 11 and 12 have no attachment. Because 11 and 12 are different than the rest, they're still false ribs, but they fall under a category known as floating ribs. And the reason they're floating, again, is because they have no attachment. So if I look at this one here, it ends right there. There's no attachment to the sternum. Rib 12, same thing. So 11 and 12 are under a different category of false rib. They are known as floating ribs. So again, true ribs have direct attachment. False ribs have indirect attachment or no attachment, and our floating ribs have no attachment whatsoever.